Hello everyone, and welcome to this first talk in our autumn series. We're really delighted to have Zeynep Iqbal and Lucien Steil, both members of INTBAU's professional network, with us today. My name is Harriet Wenberg and I'm the Executive Director of INTBAU, and we're delighted to be launching the autumn series today to all of you. So thank you very much for joining, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jules Butler, who's INTBAU's Program and Communications Coordinator, to introduce today's speaker. Jules.
Thank you, Harriet. So we're delighted to have with us today INTBAU young practitioner Zeynep Iqbal. Zeynep is an artist and an architect whose work focuses on traditional architecture and crafts in a modern context. And her portfolio comprises of mosques, cultural centres and historic buildings. Zeynep has lived in Vienna and Istanbul before moving to London in 2016, where she co-founded her own design studio, IK Architecture Group, which operates from Liverpool. Zeynep was also awarded an INTBAU Excellence Award for her design of a Turkish cultural centre in London. Zeynep will also be joined in conversation today by INTBAU professional member Lucien Steil, who is an architect, educator and artist with an extensive portfolio of urban design and buildings and artwork that include a number of publications, such as his recent book, In the Mood for Architecture, Tradition, Modernism and Serendipity, published in 2018. Lucien will be talking more about this book today. Born in Brazil, Lucien moved to Luxembourg at the age of 5. He then moved to France, where he studied architecture and urbanism in Paris and Vincennes. Lucien also spent time as an intern with Léon Courier and Maurice Coulot in Brussels. Lucien has run popular evening classes in Luxembourg, sketching workshops in high schools and juvenile detention centres in the US, and has taught at universities in Europe and North America. He was also a valued member of INTBAU's steering committee and the Council for European Urbanism. We are very grateful to both our speakers for having given up their time today. So without much further ado, over to you, Lucien.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're all in the mood for this talk. Yeah. And, you know, the title you see, it's the title of a book I did a couple of years ago, and it's called In the Mood for Architecture, Tradition, Modernism and Serendipity. I must say, among the three concepts, I'm the one which kind of pleases me most, I'm most attracted is serendipity, because it has a lightness, it has a surprise, it has an unpredictable, you know, poetry which you can't find in tradition, and modernism, which are concepts where people have been fighting, I think, for probably thousands of years, because it's this fight which is between permanence and change, between innovation and stagnation, between you know, people who want to kind of start from scratch every generation and people who can't just move their position. So serendipity is the one I like, and I put it at the end. So just to kind of, you know, just give it a lightness, and which is, I think, really the way I approach theory generally. And we talk more about that. I also like to, so I have, let me show you, I have so many notes, and they are kind of not kind of linear. So, you know, what's in the first slide, that you can keep this one, but in the first slide, there's also the quote by Italo Calvino, where he kind of says, arriving in each new city, the traveler finds again a past, a feast that he did not know he had. The foreigners of what you no longer are and no longer possess lies in wait for you in foreign unpossessed places, which I think is really also something which kind of completes and goes into and develops and kind of, you know, into this idea of serendipity, which kind of is such an open and kind of wonderfully rich and nurturing concept, which kind of really encourages you to be open to be surprised and to kind of learn in the journey which is your life and which is traditional. Now, I have my book page. I'm not promoting my book because it sells really well without that. And I have two pictures of myself, and don't be afraid. Just showing this because, you know, we are really complex beings, and, you know, we are not defined by a single image. And there are so many layers in our identity. And the self is a complex layering of many identities, not only two, there are many, many, which form the pattern of our individual being. Not a single thing not a place, not a town, but a region, a geography, a universe which is constantly changing by tectonical moves, but still recognizable over billions of archaeological times. Like our identities, our self and our selfies, tradition is not a linear, static and immutable reality, but a complex pattern of change and evolutionary wisdom. Now, let me look quickly. I have, I was mentioning permanence and change, yin and yang. The self is not a continuous linear reality. And also the definition of serendipity, and one thing which is marked as a quote below the pictures, this idea of making discoveries by accident and sagacity. So it's not only accident, but it's also a kind of wisdom, intuition of wisdom, and a kind of openness, and then kind of unprejudiced intelligence. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. When the image is new, the world is new. You're talking about this idea of newness, and I know that many of my colleagues just reject this kind of concept that the new is necessary, and just kind of going back to readings I did with my friend and psychology colleague. He's not my therapist. He refused to be my therapist, so I asked him, but he's a very, very dear friend. I think he's also listening or participating to this talk. So this idea about, so we did this reading about newness as an evolutionary necessity. So not as something which has to be rejected, even novelty, but just something which is a very stimulating concept and we are attracted by it. So tradition is not, doesn't consist in rejecting the new, but it consists in balancing the new and the old, the permanent and the changing. And I will kind of go more about that. And I like also to add a quote, which I think I don't have on any of the image. And it's a quote which I found in a book which talks about Japanese art and which refers to St. Augustine, who said something like, yeah, 3 times, the present of past things, the present of present things, and the present of future things. So just acknowledging the importance and just this kind of impossibility for us to kind of experience the world as somebody from the past. So we experience the world, we experience past traditions, past cultures, past traditions as persons within the present, and we kind of acknowledge this evolutionary, we acknowledge evolution in tradition, and tradition by definition means handing over. It doesn't mean stagnation, it doesn't mean being completely obsessed with Renaissance, being completely Renaissance with medieval times, or being obsessed with maybe the modern movement. It means being open and being in some way present in all the different layers of time and space. Next, please. My first, so I'm talking about, you know, concepts, but I also talk about myself and about my evolution. I think that's kind of interesting for young practitioners, just knowing about struggles, knowing about origin of work. So this is really one of my earliest perspectival sketches from my earliest possible sketchbooks. And I was resisting, like many people, I was teaching now recently graduates, and I was resisting as much as they were resisting to hand drawing and sketching. And I felt so, how would I say, frustrated by my lack of skills. And I also had this idea that every drawing had to be like a perfect perspectival construction, which I could give as a gift to my parents. They could frame it and hang it in their living room. And I didn't understand. I would say that the sketch is a learning, is a tool, it's an emotional gesture, it's a study, it's a reflection, it's something which can be imperfect, and it can also evolve. And I'm still kind of really happy. I'm happy I did this sketch, which was a study sketch for a public space. And public spaces at the city have fascinated me from the very beginning of my studies, have fascinated me in all of their dimensions: poetical, anthropological, social, political, architecture. And I'm really kind of convinced that this is our natural habitat. Architecture is the space we inhabit as humans in nature. And I think we need to acknowledge our gratitude to the natural world, and also kind of enhance this kind of learning we can do by imitating nature, or the principle of nature, in doing beautiful spaces which kind of support our public life and society. Next one, please. And so from my first sketch, I come to my first project. So I studied 6 years in Paris, and I never had the feeling that there was a real evolution in my studies. So the 6 years seemed to be the same every time. And I think I was kind of surrounded by professors who were very obsessed with theory, and they were not very obsessed with architecture, I would say. They were not obsessed with the image. They were not obsessed with the multi-sensory reality of the architectural world and the architectural nature. So I had to really kind of struggle through my studies more or less, you know, without any guidance, until I met Léon Krier, who became my mentor. I met him only when I was done with my studies, but I was writing to him, and he actually, you see on the lower right side of the drawing, that was, he got so desperate with me and with my struggles that he sent me a little sketch. He said, well, this is what I would do if I was doing this project you were doing. So he kind of gave me, he just unlocked me because I was turning around. And so these are my first, on the left side is my first kind of three-dimensional drawing for my thesis project. And the upper right side is the official project, or one of the official projects, which is, you see, very labyrinthic. And I was very, very soon kind of really concentrating on creating a beautiful public space. And a public space I thought was really, and every project I think is creating a center. It's creating a center of the world, which Mircea Eliade calls Caput Mundi, or the Romans call it Caput Mundi. Mircea Eliade talks about it very, very often, this idea of creating in a city, in a place, in the countryside, creating a center which kind of is meaningful and which allows development and which allows to consolidate reality. And also, like Mircea Eliade said, reality comes about when the sacred erupts into life. So there is this kind of relationship between creation, sacredness, and creating centers. And I think also Christopher Alexander develops this idea of creating centers very, very thoroughly. Next one, please. And so I'm going, so I developed this project over quite some months and got a little bit more elaborate. And I had also the input of Maurice Culot, who became the second of my mentors. And I had actually my first internship in Brussels with the Architecture Moderne with Maurice Culot, who was working with Léon Krier, and so I got introduced to Léon Krier live in Brussels, and that was such a mythical moment. Now I developed first this kind of center, and I'm showing you on the left side, you see the historical city, which has this kind of really oval medial shape. And at some point you might identify there's one central rectangular square, which in some way I thought was so crucial to revitalize this city. Next one, please. So it's called Esch-sur-Ardette, Vieille Esch, and there was an official project to demolish everything and to build a big supermarket. And I was writing, I mean, I didn't know actually what to do. I had no alternative. but I was writing a lot of articles in the local newspapers. I made a lot of polemics, and finally, and I'm not saying it's because of me, but I think everybody got really, really kind of impatient with the official project, and there was a kind of completely return to building a piece, I mean, of real city with social housing. So the city decided finally to go for creating public space and social housing. And I actually was lucky enough to get involved there too. So here you see a roof plan of one earlier version on the left side, and then a more later version where I kind of started working, you know, just improving the master plan. Next one, please. Again, you know, the drawing, and you can see the influence of Aldo Rossi. I was so fascinated by his drawings and the drama and poetry of his illustrations. When I showed this to, I entered this for a competition, and then my project was rejected. People said the shadows were indicating a totalitarian mind, which I found very surprising. But what you can see in all of these drawings, so it's a really interest in enclosure, in geometry, and I would say poetry of space and order, in a certain way, order of the city, which in some way refers back to the way cities have always been built, to be recognizable, to be identifiable, to be legible. And on the right side, it's the perspective of the central space, which I kind of deliberately wanted to be mystical and metaphysical, because having been interested in Aldo Rossi, I also got really, really fascinated by Di Chirico, the painter Di Chirico, and this Piazza d'Italia. And you can also see the influence of the Città Ideale by Luciano Lorana with this kind of center pavilion, and then the two figures in the foreground are by Schinkel. So borrowing from various places, which I think is part of the way architects have been working. So learning from other people, learning from precedent, and learning by imitation and by copying. Next one, please. And so I was not trained as a classicist, and I was kind of very intuitively in the mood to learn about classicism. I was kind of attracted to it, but I didn't have any formula, and nobody was kind of encouraging me. So when I met Leon Krier and I started reading, and you know, I got really interested, and I'm really self-taught. And so my first project is still very kind of laconic, very rationalistic, like the Italian rational movement. And then I reworked the project, and I have been doing this all the time. I'm reworking my original work all the time. So I'm going back to origin, my original efforts, but I always kind of try to learn by redoing things and by correcting myself. So I went from, in a couple of years, so from 79 to 81, and started to kind of apply a little bit more skillfully, maybe, or at least more literacy into my classical vocabulary. And it's the same project, I just found out learning is a very slow process. It's a pretty messy process, but it's also a lot of fun. And the next one you see a little bit more, next picture you see a little bit more detail of this piazza. Can you show the next picture, please? Where you see, so you go from on the left side, you see an existing, I refaced an existing brutalist gallery and connected it to this half circular monument, which inspired by the Città Ideale. And then you have a little first piazza, and then you're climbing up through a number of terraces which connect to shops and which can be used for cafes or restaurants and so on. Now, which is really, really interesting is that on the last building, the small building on the upper right side is the site where I had my first building. Please, the next one. So that's my very first building. 86 social housing and built in the budget of social housing. And then some people said, that doesn't look like social housing. It must have been very expensive, and it wasn't very expensive. It was the same amount of money any other social housing project in Luxembourg per square foot was used for. It's very laconic, it's very simple, but it has balconies, which give dignity, and it has some elements. It has a nice entrance, it has the date. And then I reworked, so 30 years later, in 2016, I just did a correction of my original design. I thought I needed to add a little bit more complexity. Next one, please. Yeah, so that's the context, and you see a lot of cars, and that wasn't my idea. And then people start adding lamps and letter boxes and the things you have to think of. And yeah, and then a cover of a book I did on my hometown. Next one, please. Here, unfortunately, so you see my first building. There on the left side, there are the two next buildings. I did a restoration plan for these buildings, but they were demolished despite my fight. So I'm very sad about that. But anyway, so you can't win all the battles. And I'm quoting Jorge Borges here: the future is inevitable and precise, but it may not occur. Next one, please. A project in London, because we kind of are dealing with London. I thought I add some projects. A project I did with my friend and colleague Colin Moulin, an Irish architect who came to Luxembourg because he imagined, because Luxembourg was the country, if Léon Krier and Rob Krier, he would find an openness for traditional architecture, and he found me. I was the only one, and I think in the last 50 years, there's not been a single young Luxembourg architect who embraced traditional architecture or classicism, and I don't know for what reason. Now, this competition was really, really interesting because it was consistent in demolishing 3 towers, I think, 3 towers of 60 meters high, and replacing them with a real complex mixed-use neighborhood. The project was, there was a change of government, and then the project was dropped. We got actually 3rd or 4th prize, I think. And then on the lower right, you see the build projects. So, but in some way, every drawing, every effort of good architecture, I think is like a prayer, which brings goodness and hope and a vision to the world. And in the architectural reality, drawings sometimes have done more change to the architectural practice than many buildings. Many of these buildings stay for 20 years and get demolished, whereas drawings, they stay for hundreds of years, inspire architects, and bring about positive change. Next one, please. A project in Luxembourg. So I was mentioning creating centers. This is a brownfield project, and here what I think is really interesting. So it's the idea of working within nature, within an archaeological site. So there are a number of archaeological vestiges which we maintained, and then creating a very kind of loose network of very permeable urban structures, which creates, I would say, a real connected ensemble of wonderful public spaces. And I think each of these public spaces is really highly poetical. This again is a project which is only social housing, some shops on the main street on the lower part, and then the oval building is an office building. And the upper red building is an existing industrial building, which we suggested becomes a cultural center, a clubhouse. And then on the right, the small building is a daycare. And then the tower, you see these 4 blocks, square blocks, these are the only private development 6th floor block towers. Next one, please. Yeah, you see the axonometry, and I kind of have a quote which I can't actually read, but you can read it, so you are lucky. And it says buildings, Giovanni Palasma, and if you have not read him, just go and read. It's a fantastic fantastic author, architect, and I think again, with my friend Andre Venter, we worked a lot on this idea of an embodied mind and working not only with our reason, but with our emotions, with our feelings, when we approach the creation of, or the building of a better world. So not separating between the mind, emotion, and the body. So really making sure. So like he says, buildings do not merely provide physical shelter or facilitate distinct activities. In addition to housing our fragile bodies and actions, they must also house our minds, memories, desires, and dreams. Next one, please. A counter project I did in Luxembourg as an alternative to low density private development, and where I kind of mentioned also Joanny Palasmagan, this idea about newness and primordial. So the newness and primordial means the original in the human mind is an aspect of artistic and architectural image that can be understood through neuroscientific research. Our nervous system seems to be activated by newness, and we seek novel stimuli, whereas the deepest emotive impact arises from the primary layers of our nervous system and memory. So this kind of necessity for, I would say, modernism or modernity and tradition or traditionalism, and so permanence and change. And there's a really wonderful quote in Lampedusa, the leopard, where Count Tancredi says, if you want to remain the same, you have to change. So rather than opposing change and identity or remaining the same, saying that you can only remain yourself if you change. Which also makes me think about Buddhism, and again, my friend Andre Venter, who says the self doesn't exist. And the self is in some way a layering of different things which kind of move and kind of change and evolve, but still remain recognizable. And also, next one, please. Also, next picture. Also, this idea, which I have come across in Mathieu Hénard, who wrote a book which is called The Compass and talks a lot about the dialectics between Western and Eastern, Middle Eastern, and Oriental cultures, where he says identity comes when the self encounters the other, or when the self encounters otherness. And I think that's, again, a really, really crucial aspect, especially in our time where white supremacy, white privilege, racism, tries to kind of focus on the superiority, racial superiority or cultural superiority of either one religion or one culture versus another. Here, the 3D project is a complete new neighborhood at the edge of Luxembourg. And you can see the blocks, the enclosed blocks and inner courtyards, and there's a central avenue leading to a half circular square with shops, and you have schools and little chapel, you have a water tower and so on. Next one, please. And the version, again, I'm correcting myself, so I'm trying, this is an alternative where instead of having closed blocks, the blocks are formed by buildings, which allow more architects, more facades, more wall space, and more diversity. And it's an interesting concept I learned from Leo and Rob Creer. And then you see on the left side is this kind of more fragmented master plan. On the right side is the original first sketch of the project. Next one, please. And then you can see these idealized elevations, because I think that you can measure the quality of a project by referring to the existing historical city or to the no longer existing historical city. So this is an attempt I did in kind of showing my elevation, which is at the bottom, and it's projected on a 17th century engraving, and just kind of to show the difference, but also show the kind of lineage, the character, the continuation. So this idea of permanence and also evolution and kind of reference and gratitude to what has been left over to us. And this is particularly dramatic in Luxembourg, where there's an incredibly drive, very brutal drive to demolish everything which is kind of old. And there's now an organization in Luxembourg which is called We Want to Save What We Are. And it's mostly composed of foreigners, which is kind of really surprising. Now, Luxembourg has 50% of foreign population. These people are more aware of the damage which is done by this demolition reconstruction, which happens in Luxembourg right now. Now, this leads me to talk about reconstruction. And we have, next please, reconstructing our minds, reconstructing our culture, reconstructing our crafts. And mankind has gone through war, destruction of whatever kind constantly. The world has never been a really great place. The world has always been a tormented and traumatic place, and there have always been destructions and reconstructions, but reconstruction tried or attempted to really rebuild the world as it was, and often better. And I think Lebanon is a really dramatic example. It has been destroyed so many times recently, in very, very recent times, even quite in August, the last one. And I did with my partner, Colin Miller, we did a reconstruction of the souks, next one please, in Beirut in '94. And that leads me to talk about imitation, because rather than trying to invent the souks, we're just looking at what is a souk, how were the souks built. We look at the plans, footprints of the past, and just try to get into the mood, into the character, into the tectonics of the traditional souks, and created this, I think, really attractive recreation, like where Mircea Eliade says, every creation is the recreation of the original creation. So I thought that we really did a good job in getting as close as possible to the original creation. And also, I think it's Heidegger who says, the essence of something is its origin. So when we want to reach to an essential meaning, we kind of go back to that. Next one, please. Yeah, so another example, and talking about East and West, the Orient, which kind of has had an absolutely amazing influence on Western architecture. And I think people who deny that are just not really very well informed. We know that Romantic architecture, Gothic architecture, classical architecture, even our modern cities, the traditional city wouldn't be there if there hadn't been Mesopotamia, even there hadn't been Egypt. We are always benefiting for this dialogue, this dialectics between various cultures. And this was an example where we kind of worked again with imitation. Next one, please. In Aleppo, reconstructive Aleppo, which has been destroyed by Russian, ISIS, Syrian, I don't know who else. And we rebuilt it, and this was done by fourth-year students, 21, 22-year students. Under my guidance, I had 9 students. They did this amazing, wonderful job in about 3 weeks. And it's really the historical part of the city. Next one, please. And they asked me, and here on the left side, you see existing condition, on the right side, proposed condition. And my students said, what are we going to do? I said, let's look at the city in the best places and just imitate what has been done. So we imitated. Now, on the left side, you see that was before the destruction. It was already destroyed by urban renovation, by urban renewal. The city, Aleppo, had already made place for parkings, shopping centers, and they started already to destroy central parts near the citadel, which is one of the most sacred and the most important parts. The building on the top, the kind of half, this U-shaped courtyard building is actually where you had the headquarters of the Syrian government, where they tortured people, and then later it was the headquarters of ISIS. Next one, please. Perspective of the reconstruction done by my wonderful students from the University of Notre Dame. And the next one, please. Character studies of housing. Again, 3 weeks. We did this in 3 weeks. So because Zeynep asked me, are you able to convey your principle of traditional architecture to your students? And I said, I hope so. But this was done, you know, I didn't do this project. This was done with my students, and I gave some indication, I did the guidance, but they were so brave and so wonderful. The next one, please. I think I have to run a little bit because I'm taking time from Zeynep, and I promise to be short. So project I did in London last summer during a summer school, actually the summer before, 2 years ago, 2018. And this talks about reconstruction by adding things rather than demolishing things. So it's just taking a really terrible square. Next one, please. Terrible square in London, very important in an area which is kind of really, you see, it's kind of really chaotic, fragmented, and then you have this roundabout, which is no longer a roundabout. It was a roundabout, and it needs desperate help. And then you have the monument, modern building, which is registered building, celebrating Faraday, important scientist. Next one, please. And so my proposal is adding around the Faraday, keeping the Faraday, and kind of just defining the roundabout, fixing the geometry, pavement, and adding a number of, next one, please. Adding a number of buildings which really create a tangible, sustainable, and approachable civic realm, which kind of appeals to the pedestrian, appeals to the locals, because there's both the scale and both the functions within this jungle of high-rise and really desolate urbanscape. It appeals and it creates a harbor of peace, an oasis of urban integrity. Next one, please. I'm getting finally to the end, and I'm really pleased to have this photo. This photo is the first time I met Zeynep, and I was late, so I'm kind of here. You see me in the front from back. I don't know who took this photo. I'm reading the program. I just arrived late. Just the course, summer school had already started, and Zeynep is at the right edge, almost cut off. That's the first time we came across, and I think I was immediately attracted to her. She's an incredible, charismatic, and inspiring person. And we were talking about mentorship, and I think she has become my mentor. She has become a role model for most of the students. Everybody really loved her. And I have been fascinated by her work since, and we really keep in touch. And I'm so really honored and privileged to be able to be in this talk with Zeynep and with INTBAU. Thank you to everybody. And just the last picture is just like a sketch I did in Sevilla, where we met as the summer school. And the last one, which is called Return from Sevilla. And I hope you see that I'm not replicating Sevilla architecture. I'm not replicating either Western, but I'm kind of trying to really embrace in the form of the Capriccio as a poetic tool to explore and process my culture, you know, and my learning. So for me, every drawing is a way of learning and evolving. Thank you so much. My apologies to Zeynep. I took 12 minutes.
Lucien, thanks very much. It was really inspiring to listen to you, especially for me, because we know each other since almost 4 years. It was for me very special to listen to a journey starting from university years. Thank you. And I have to say that honor is mine. It's very special to be on this platform, talking, being in conversation with you and presenting our works together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I need to share my screen. Just shortly, I wanted to mention about Seville, and because you already talked about it. Seville Summer School, it was really an inspiring experience for me because what happened there was we worked with local students, and we went out, we visited the local buildings, we really tried to localize ourselves all together, and we shared that space and then designed, did a kind of like urban design. And that was the first time I met you, Lucien, Harriet, Alejandro, and since then we kept in touch. It was such a great support network. So I'm very thankful also to Sami that we all went and experienced it together. Okay, so I have limited time, so I want to quickly introduce myself, my approach, and then go into my work. Today I will be talking about my Culture Center project, with which I also received the INTBAU Excellence Award 2018. It was, I think, so I thought that it was a good idea to present this one because of its content, techniques that's being used, and the process of making it, which is essential to all architectural design. So it's special to me because it lies in between two fields that I've been trained in, art and architecture. I'm an architect in training, and I further studied traditional art. In a way, I've been trained in two different approaches to design. To give you a background, I studied architecture at the Vienna University of Technology, which was an architecture school focused on more of a modern approach. I think this was in contrast to the city, sometimes at least in contrast to the city of Vienna that I was living in, which was famous for its heritage. And then living and working in Istanbul, also heritage was and still is a part of our daily lives. So it was important to me that I should re-explore actually some of the questions I had about heritage-related projects. And then I joined Prince's School in London to learn about traditional arts and crafts, which is obviously more of a traditional approach. Yeah, so in architecture, I think we've been trained to think that we are the know-it-alls of the industry, and I find this really problematic. And what inspired me as a young practitioner was the knowledge of wisdom embedded in the traditional crafts. And the traditional techniques kind of give you a sense of humility in knowing that there are lots of different processes it takes place building a traditional or in a traditional building. And this respect, I believe, historically translates into master mason, carpenter, all kind of craftsmen and interior and so on. So continuing from this inspiration, today I will talk about the kind of thinking processes I had while designing this project. So this is my master project. I investigated, or I tried to investigate, how traditional arts and crafts can be applied in an urban setting in London. for this project, I was very lucky to work with the director of the school, who is a practicing architect himself, Dr. Ahlet Assam. Yeah, so I wanted to look at London, a multicultural city, and Dalston especially. There is a large youth population and a large Turkish population also. The area can be described as a young, jazzy, has a potential to be developed, and also multicultural. I can shortly mention that I spend time in the district, talk to local people, visit local buildings, and I tried to be there and localize myself also. I did research and found out that Hackney Council has a Dalston Area Action Plan 2030, and local people are campaigning for more community places. So this was a direction I wanted to work towards. My project reflect art and architecture into a space, and I created a series of panels for that. So this is one of them, the end result. Basically, here, if I start from school, at school we learned about traditional techniques, painting techniques, which I thought would be great to combine it with an architectural project. And what I started to miniaturize the locality of Dalston. In a way, like you would say, Lucien, more of a poetic reflection or painting, I can say. It is a miniature painting. Here in the center, I express the layout of my building, and its surrounding parts is actually, you can see some Victorian details of the Dalston area, and top left is actually, there are some details from the Dalston train station, and bottom right, there is the Pentecostal church, which is still there. And this is inspired by a 19th century Asian style miniature painting. And here you see the kind of design process of the plans. This is more of a realistic approach. There was, of course, a long process of thinking and sketching. You can see the Pentecostal church. So next to it is my site. And then the same layout, what you saw in the miniature painting. This is the architectural style, hand-drawn painting. So one of my main panels was about expressing the section and kind of finding a language that I could express in the section also. Here you see a part of background studies, geometry analysis, and a language that would reflect into the smallest detail in the interior. The image on the bottom left shows an old drawing of a Turkish hammam around Dalston area from 1862. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was, for me, it was an inspiration because it had some historical precedent. So here is my ornamental section after working this kind of studying through sketches and the evaluation. This illustrates the interior space arrangement. And if I should talk about just the process of making this, drawing, painting, and all that, color studies. So it kind of developed over many weeks. And the play of light and ornament was key to the courtyard space at the center, which I named Hayat, meaning the life. and then it became the name of the cultural center also. And the architectural language, of course, I can't show so many details in one layout, but it developed kind of after my researches on both Turkish and British arts and crafts movements. And the interior space, there are carved wooden pieces, stained glass, wall panels, murals, the kind of, although I'm not trained in all of these crafts, at that school, we learned about these tile or packaging or stained glass crafts, and it kind of gives you an insight of making things, and then you naturally want to include them and kind of play with that to create an interior space that can be enjoyed in daily life, I guess. And then I began to detail parts of the section. Something I wanted to highlight, that the colors were actually not random, although it looks like I just, used the brush, some colors, etc. It was, for me, it was a challenge, to be honest. As an architect, we are not trained to work with colors. So I was trying to find a balance and create a palette also. And the paints that I used, I made them top. You can see this partly made some watercolors from natural pigments using a glass mirror and gum arabic. Bottom left, you can see the making process. And these color tests are basically on handmade hemp paper. I ordered them from India. This is really nice paper to work on, to paint on, and some color tests. This is an important page for me. It shows a part of my sketches and the evaluation of a mural painting on the top part. So I started to sketch freehand first. There are some inspirations coming from Turkish tiles, Turkish traditional Islamic tiles. And then I brought it into a kind of architectural order. Again, bottom you can see the kind of looking for a language, kind of like sketching and thinking, and it's all going kind of leading me to a point. And this is the panel that I'm showing, a kind of this divisional seating design. We call it sedir. And then the mural painting you can see, and then top part is showing the stained glass. And all these paintings are on handmade paper. Some of them are hand paper, some of them are indigo paper, and using natural pigments and the paints that I made. And this is basically me conceptualizing the kind of different elements from British and Turkish arts and crafts movements that I included and incorporated in my design. This is inspired by an art and craft design by Charles Francis Boyce, I think around late 19th century. I really like the painting and the way he brought different elements of design in a painting together. I kind of did it in my project to conceptually show my references. And today, studying and practicing traditional arts and crafts in architecture, I think helped me think more of a balanced way. At least that's how I believe, and we can more talk about it, how and why. And today I continue doing architectural paintings and also architectural designs from my studio in Liverpool. Thank you.
This is so beautiful.
Thank you, Lucien.
This is amazing, really.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the beauty is one part, and there is the, just being in that design process, being passionate about it, and just imagining that one day, if it is built, if the people, if they are going to enjoy in their, daily life in London, coming in and out, or will that be a solution to the community living there? Not a solution, maybe that's a big word, but a place that they could come together, like the name I chose, Hyatt, the life. So I don't know, I guess, until it is built.
I don't know. Can I ask questions now, or is? Well, let me just, because I think there are questions coming from people, from other people. But one thing, I really am so inspired by your drawing. The drawings are really masterwork. They're really, really beautiful. They're so delicate. They are so fantastic. And we have been talking about it. So I'm just wondering, how can we get this type of quality? Yeah, I know the painting stands for itself. It's in its own world, and it can influence the way we think about architecture, the way we inhabit the world. So I think it has I said before, it's like a prayer. This is bringing so many good energies into the world that it's already a kind of sufficient contribution, I would say. But something I'm really, I would say, intrigued. How can we again bring this kind of quality into the built environment? How can we get this really the same emotion I get at looking at your painting? How can we get this by looking at buildings and inhabiting buildings? What would you do if you get, because I know that there might be a chance that you get this to be built and that you might be the architect. What are we going to do? Are you ready? What are you going to do to get the craftsman and the politician and the community on board to really push for materializing in 3 dimensions, in material construction, this type of quality?
Okay. Basically, I don't have a straightforward answer for this, I think. And I can only talk from my experience. And I am fairly new, of course, in my architectural career. But from my experience, studying architecture and then living, working in Istanbul, and then going to London and studying again traditional arts and crafts, I guess I kind of took a different path than any other maybe architecture student would take and then become an architect. I think studying traditional arts and crafts, I think when you get an insight on how things are being made, just know it or make it, just be there, or maybe engage with the craftsman or the process of making it, really. I think it would be, it would take us maybe to a better place where we can really reflect the design into an actual building. That might be one thing. And the other thing can be the experience, not only yours, but also from someone, like from your mentor's experience. That is the second thing. And the third thing can be, again, in the traditional way of learning things, like you also mentioned, reconstructing, not reconstructing, but reproducing something in a way how it's been done before. It teaches you the way of doing things. It doesn't mean that you're going to do it all the time, but it's a kind of learning process. It is how traditional arts and crafts being taught. In architecture, it's all a different story. But how can we reflect it in the architecture might be maybe, I'm thinking the good thing is maybe just creating some scale drawings of historic buildings and studying and just engaging with some good designs that's been done before, and then kind of reflecting into other designs. Because if you are disconnected from it, I'm not sure where you will be ending in your design. Yeah, when I come to your question, how can we actualize this? I don't know, because it's a process that many people can be involved, you know, how the construction process is working. But there was one thing that happened after the exhibition, after the degree show. I invited actually the director of Cultural Centre in London, Turkish Cultural Centre in London, and after a few weeks or maybe a few months, I don't remember exactly, I've been commissioned to do the kind of interior fit-out and the extension of the Cultural Centre. It was a very, very slow process, so we only actually did the part, the extension design. I didn't come to interior fit-out, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen, but hopefully one day. I don't know. What do you think?
You know, I have a question. Do you know the project by Nada and Mark Breitman in Amsterdam? They built a Turkish mosque in Amsterdam.
No, I don't know. No.
And actually what they said, it is very good. It's very successful. It's very well done. What they said, they did the project, and then there were these Turkish craftsmen. They just took over and they did it very well. They were very, very surprised because the community was so eager to get it really well done, and they did it exactly the way it should be done. It must be really beautiful. So if you have time if you visit Amsterdam, you should go. It's also a Turkish.
Hopefully, I would love to.
And it's
how do you think? How do you engage with the community to get support as an architect?
Yeah, you know, I'm asking you the question because I think I failed to do it, really. Because I always thought that the beautiful drawing was enough. And I always said, why should I go to the building site? Because there's this beautiful drawing. So I was very naive, I would say. And, you know, I told you the story by Philippe Rotier, who's an architect in Ibiza. And he doesn't do a drawing before the construction. He does just sketches and diagrams. And he does the beautiful drawings when everything is built. Mm-hmm. And he spends a lot of time on the site, like you said, with the craftsman. He empowers the craftsman, and he forces the clients to work on the site too. So the clients have to do manual building work on the site. So they have to help building their own house. So it's a kind of really particular way, but it works out. It's very successful. It works out really well. But I think you gave already a really good answer. The fact that you have to engage with craftsmanship, and that you have to know the process, and I think one thing I would do differently, I would spend far more time being around on the building site. And I think these ideas that when you have a building, you live on the building site, like in medieval time, they had like a cabin on the building site. The architect was living part of his time on the building site and interacting all the time with the builders. I think that's probably a very good idea. It's like a nice type of holiday.
Juliet, so how are we with time?
How are we doing for time? We're slightly over time, but I think it's important to let you both speak. And I was wondering whether we could have a question from the audience. We've got a great question from Cindy here, who's asking, do you both think that detailed observation and drawing actually improve documentation of historical sites in comparison to sort of 3D laser scanning and other techniques such as photogrammetry? Yes, so that sort of links into what you were both just talking about, I think, with...
I think, you know, just if I can jump in quickly, I really think that hand drawing, hand measured drawings are absolutely essential for whatever we do, because it's the only way that we can get our embodied mind, our heart, our emotion in our hands. Because the computer and all the incredible technology we have is creating a distance between our intelligence, our sensitivity, and our doing. And I'm not saying that we have to reject it, but I think the first thing is really to engage with our whole being, physically, emotionally, and then use the tools very kind of strategically to implement and to kind of accentuate, enhance what we have accomplished already with our hands. I think the first part is always a process, and it's working really well. I've seen it so many times, and I know that when students start only limiting and referring to softwares, their intelligence, it's not in their mind. It's not in their memory. It's in the computer. It's in the software. It remains detached from our emotion and direct human experience. And it's just, that's just a fact.
I agree. I think I'll agree with that. I can again only talk from my experience. When I was studying architecture, we started straight away with computer drawings, and we had only, I think, 2 classes in which we would do some practical drawings. But except that it was all about computer-based designs, and I felt that I wasn't really engaging with the buildings. It was more like I think I was losing the sense of the, scale, in which scale I'm working in. And then once I started to use my hands in a way, like you say, find that connection of mind, heart, and hands. I really believe in this because at least in my case, it really worked. I kind of, I mean, of course, I'm not saying I created, I'm really happy what I created with or whatever. It's just I find myself in a state that I am kind of exploring what's inside and it's coming out in a way. So using hands, I think it really helps in the creative process. But I wouldn't say no to the technology. I'm looking also forward to using some programs to explore some of the geometry designs, some future geometry designs, I can say. Thanks very much for hosting us here, both of you, Harriet and Juliet. And also it was very special to be on this platform with you, Lucien. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you too. I want to talk again. I think Zeynep wanted to talk about the mentorship, mentor, professor. I like to thank you all. I like to, the people who are listening to us and have been so patient. I really like to thank you, Juliette and Harriet and Zeynep so much. And I really want to really stress, this idea of relationship, the learning, and also that as professionals, we always have to acknowledge that learning, we're continuing to learn. And I know that I feel quite gratified by teaching, because I have always considered teaching as a learning process. And I've also considered my students, even when they're high school students, that they were my professors. They were my mentors. And acknowledging that I learn from children or from young students, and I always get this idea of serendipity. You know, that's so important for me. The surprise to say, I say, wow, how do they know about that? How did they know about it? How, and you know, this wonder you get from when people communicate with you and reveal things for you which you have not seen, and it can be children of 10 years or 5 years, and it can be a very old person. So for me, it's so important to acknowledge and to be very humble, and to acknowledge that we are learning from one another, and that the masters, you know, when we talk about masters, they're mostly dead. You know, in Buddhism, the masters are all very, very old men who don't talk anymore. They just laugh. When you ask a question, they just smile and laugh. They don't answer any of your questions. Or they're dead and you have to read their books, if they have written some books. But I think the real masters are ourselves to one another. And so that's very important. And I think this is so important, the intergenerational, the respect for old and young people, also the intercultural relationships, learning from difference. And I think this idea that our identity depends on how we interact with people who are other. And the otherness can be various things. It can be gender, it can be race, it can be culture. So, and I think that's really absolutely crucial in my life and also my professional experience.
So just to pass on huge thanks, both from Jules and from me, to you, Lucien, to you, Zeynep, for launching the Autumn series so wonderfully with your really inspiring work that's just beautiful to look at and to think about, and to give us some insight into your thought processes too. So thank you very, very much, and would encourage anybody who's on the talk who isn't currently a member of INTBAU. Jules has now got a slide up to show you can go to our website to join for free. You'll then get our newsletter, so you'll find out about all the other talks that are going to come up in this series and the series that will follow. And also to look into the professional membership schemes, of which Lucien and Zeynep are both such important parts of ours. So thank you very much again, Zeynep and Lucien, to you, Jules, as well. And thanks to everyone for joining. A great Zoom debut, Lucien. Excellent. Good.
Thank you so much. Love you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.